Welcome to part 4. I'm going to start out by just quickly reiterating the framework of this series, the one that I'd outlined back in part 1. In looking at the various explanations for suffering, there's the monotheistic explanations that suffering is punishment, or suffering benefits us, or suffering must exist for the greater good of free will, or that the reason for suffering is just beyond our finite understanding. There's also the Eastern explanation that the perceived world is just an illusion, hence suffering too is just an illusion. There's the dualistic and polytheistic explanations that the divine is not all-powerful, or that the divine is not all good. And finally, the non-supernatural answer, that the natural world is indifferent to creature suffering. And in looking at these various answers, the question I'll be asking is, which explanation, or combination of explanations, can most accurately describe and predict a large class of observations? And by large class of observations, I mean suffering that people bring upon themselves, suffering that people bring upon others, and the suffering that's inherent in nature. All right, up to my second supernatural explanation for why suffering exists, and that's that it's good for us, it's for our benefit. And we can find certain biblical passages that tell us that pain is a gift from God sent to improve our characters. I'm going to read a passage here from James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. Now, in the book of Job, one of Job's friends in quotes, so to speak, also depicts suffering as divinely prescribed therapy. In Job chapter 36, this is verses 15 and 36, the friend named Elihu says, by means of suffering, God rescues those who suffer, for he gets their attention through adversity. It was to prevent you from getting into a life of evil that God sent this suffering. Now, on the one hand, I think this suffering benefits us explanation is arguably an improvement on this pain, on the first one, on the idea that pain is always punishment. Because this explanation can at least make sense out of select instances of suffering in all of the three categories that I discussed, those three broad categories for suffering. That first one being that suffering that people bring upon themselves. An example of how that can benefit us, say example of an alcoholic whose loss of job and family could lead to a life turnaround, a sober and healthy lifestyle and a life that regains everything that he'd lost. Second category was suffering that people bring upon innocent people. Now, an example of how this could benefit us, an example might be a victim who matures as a result of suffering, increasing his or her courage and compassion and empathy and patience. Last category was suffering inherent in nature. And part of that, of course, is pain, but pain can be a beneficial signal of danger. It can tell us to get off a hot stove. It can make us work hard to satisfy our hunger and our thirst. And suffering today can make us stronger tomorrow. Just as our muscles can grow stronger after they repair themselves after the strains of a vigorous workout, our characters can grow stronger when tested through vigorous strains of adversity. Or in other words, there is some truth behind the cliche that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yet even that cliche contains a caveat of whatever doesn't kill you. So this suffering benefits theory gets a little more difficult to defend in those instances where suffering does kill people. Now, I like the way Rabbi Kushner put it in his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. There's a section where Kushner is trying to figure out why God lets small children fall out of open windows. And Kushner writes, it can't be to teach a child a lesson about exploring new areas. By the time the lesson is over, the child is dead. Now, this suffering benefits explanation is all the more difficult to make sense of when applied to mass tragedies, to the hundreds of thousands of innocent Rwandans who were hacked to death with machetes during their civil war, millions who perished in Nazi concentration camps, millions of children who continue to die every year through disease and famine and so on. Now, when I pursue this point with theists who offer me this suffering benefits us explanation, I find that most take one of two approaches. Some will outright admit that this suffering benefits explanation, it benefits us It just can't be applied across the board. That sometimes pain is best explained by other reasons, like the first one that maybe we just live in a fallen world, or the one I'll discuss next about it's going to be a side consequence of free will, or it's just beyond our comprehension, or so on. And some will insist, on the other hand, that even mass tragedies are hidden blessings from God, as the survivors learn vital lessons. And as for the dead victims, well, they're no doubt enjoying a blissful eternity in heaven. I'll just add here, too, that if believers really fully embrace their wish-filled and evidence-starved premise of heaven, they might even celebrate disasters that take the lives of millions. Although, of course, believers tend not to do this. All right, third supernatural explanation for suffering is that it must exist for the greater good of free will. Now, this explanation has it that in order to make ethical behavior meaningful, God had to give man the free will to accept him or reject him. And allowing people to be free means that in addition to giving humans the capacity for compassion, God also gave us the capacity for destructiveness toward ourselves and toward others. So this approach encompasses this pain as punishment theory, and it expands upon it, that suffering results not only because we can choose to hurt ourselves, we can choose to hurt others, and defenders of this theory will point out that God could have created a world free of suffering by withholding free will, but that such a world would have been meaningless, something akin to a world of pre-programmed robots. That the only way to obtain the tremendous value of having people who could genuinely love each other and do good deeds was to also permit us to reject that path. Now, this explanation, at least according to some theists, can also explain the existence of Satan and other assorted demons, that angels also have the freedom to either hate or love God. So if we apply this theory to explaining why, for example, God didn't stop the gunman Thomas Hamilton from firing 109 rounds into a kindergarten class, splattering the walls with the blood of the 16 little children. And this happened in Scotland back in March 1996. Well, the suffering must exist for the greater good of free will. Explanation has it that interference from God would have inhibited Hamilton's free will, apparently the higher priority. Now I have a footnote here that reads, now God's apparent hands-off approach to restricting the free will of violent criminals, of course, will sometimes result in the significant restriction in the free will of the innocent victims. Of course, this applies for all the innocent victims of war, too. But once again, as long as the premises of heaven and hell are accepted, and one can be comforted with the idea that all wrongs will be righted someday. Now, one of the most serious limitations, or flaws even, of this free will explanation is that even if one does accept this reason for why God allows humans to behave inhumanely towards one another, the theory just does not hold up well when it comes to suffering that has nothing to do with human free will, such as natural disasters. It would be difficult to make the case that human free will played a role in that 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that struck 11 countries, killing 225,000 people. Similarly, much of the suffering of animals in the wild, famine and disease and the whole predator versus prey setup, all of this exists independently of human behavior or human misbehavior. It just seems unlikely that anyone could make a convincing argument that human freedom to turn away from God is the reason why infant sand tiger sharks will devour their siblings while they're still in utero. So whenever I pursued this point with theists who gave me this free will explanation, I found once again that they would supplement that answer with other explanations, that we live, for example, in a fallen world, Satan rules the earth for the time being, suffering is sometimes beneficial, God's kingdom will return soon, and everything will be right then, or just that the infinite mind of God can't be comprehended by the finite mind of man, which leads me to my fourth and last way that I found that monotheistic religions will try to reconcile an all-good and all-powerful God with the reality of suffering, and that is that it's just beyond our understanding.
I can't understand. I can't understand. I just can't understand. I can't understand.